In 2018, a research group led by a top paleobiologist announced a shocking discovery. This discovery pushed the origin of animal life on Earth deep into a distant past, far beyond any previous imagination. The fossil sample they studied was excavated from a remote and arid sandstone hill region in the southern part of the Australian continent. This is an ancient land where the ground surface itself is older than the history of complex life on the planet. From those ancient fossil tissues, scientists successfully extracted specific fat molecules known as biological lipids. These chemical traces are unique biological fingerprints left behind through hundreds of millions of years of evolution. It is the fundamental material left behind when a creature that once lived and breathed gradually transformed into inanimate stone blocks over time. The laboratory analysis results were completely clear and indisputable. The ancient creature named Dickinsonia was indeed an animal. This is the oldest animal ever confirmed by science in the world, with an age of up to 558 million years old. To truly understand the meaning of this colossal number, we need to cast aside all ordinary reference frames of human history. This bizarre creature once existed and thrived on Earth 558 million years ago. At that time, giant dinosaurs would not even appear. For another 320 million years, the first land vegetation would also take another 90 million years to begin its journey of colonizing the continents. Even the Cambrian explosion event, which produced most forms of animal body plans today, was still in the distant future. This creature had a flat disc-shaped body, divided into many symmetrical segments, pressed tightly into the ancient seabed mat, like a woven rug. Its body resembled a giant fingerprint of an entity that Earth had forgotten long ago in the timeline. It completely lacked a mouth, had no digestive system, no excretory organs, no eyes or nose, and no limbs to move. For many decades, leading paleobiologists could not agree on what this creature actually was. Many hypotheses suggested that it could be an ancient fungus, a form of lichen, or a failed evolutionary experiment, leaving no descendants. These fossil samples were so bizarre and completely different from any living creature on Earth today. Because of this, the entire Ediacaran biota population was once considered a mysterious biological anomaly. It was like a forgotten world or a primitive evolutionary draft that nature discarded before creating modern animals. However, the discovery of the specific fat trace completely changed all old perceptions of the scientific community. This type of fat is normally only produced by organisms in the animal kingdom, not from fungi, lichens, or bacterial mats. Those biological molecules locked tightly inside the ancient fossil were the original chemical remnants of a living individual. It once existed when the shapes of the continents were completely unfamiliar and the planet atmosphere was very thin. That was a primitive era when no creature possessing a backbone existed anywhere on this Earth. They did not leave behind sturdy bones or protective limestone shells over long millions of years. What they left for posterity were only faint imprints on the sand and weak molecular ghosts hidden deep in the rock. No matter what form this strange creature had, science is now certain that it was the first animal to appear. The world it once ruled was a quiet, oxygen-poor ocean, dominated by creatures unlike anything today. That is a completely new chapter of the blue planet history that we humans have only begun to unfold the first pages. The next research object of the scientists was not a new excavation pit, but a wooden box filled with ancient bones. These bone fragments had laid silently in the archive storage for nearly 3 decades. After being found in northern caves, those were 3 tiny and freezing entrances, carved deep into a vertical limestone cliff in the remote far north wilderness. Looking out from the cave mouth was a vast subarctic tundra, stretching endlessly toward the blurry horizon. Here there were absolutely no ancient monuments, no painted walls, or exquisitely carved stone pillars. Surrounding it was only boulders, roaring wind sounds, and the bones of animals that died in the last ice age. However, these bones were not merely buried by time, but they bore clear marks of human impact. When observed under a magnifying microscope, the research team discovered very fine parallel cuts on a mammoth rib bone. The jawbones of ancient horses also showed similar patterns, regularly and intentionally. The limb bones of reindeer bore the characteristic marks of butchering processes by primitive stone tools of humans. Those were indentations that only formed when a human hand gripped a stone blade and scraped hard with a clear purpose. This was definitely not the gnawing of wolves or natural cracks caused by severe frost impacts. They were the remnants left from a meal prepared by humans, whom history textbooks once refused to recognize. The chronological numbers behind this archaeological discovery were what left the global scientific community stunned and astonished. During most of the 20th century, the widely accepted date for humans setting foot in the Americas was 13,000 years ago. This timeline was tied to stone spearheads and campsites of the ancient culture in the southwestern United States. This hypothesis model had taken root so deeply that all contrary evidence was ignored or fiercely attacked. The bones at the northern cave were originally excavated by a persistent archaeologist over many long years. From the very beginning, he argued that these artifacts pushed the human timeline back to 24,000 years. However, the academic community at that time flatly refused to listen, and his career suffered many losses. It was not until the reanalysis in 2017 that his entire work was completely vindicated. In a journal paper, the radiocarbon dating results were completely accurate, and the cuts on the bones were confirmed to be real. The butchered bones were determined to have the latest age, falling around 12,000 years ago. Humans had been present in the remote far north, butchering wild horses and mammoths inside caves as small as a closet. They survived there right during the last glacial maximum period, when most of North America was still locked under ice sheets. The consequences of this discovery deeply fractured all foundational theories of modern archaeology. If humans were already in the far north 24,000 years ago, then the story of a single migration wave completely collapses. The icy corridor connecting the landmasses, which was thought to be the path for ancient humans to move south, did not exist at that time. That sole pathway was blocked by giant ice sheets, meaning humans arrived here through other ways never thought of before. Some human groups might have lived silently in ice-free valleys throughout thousands of long years. The debate over how they set foot here and who they really were has no conclusion yet and is always shifting. The most haunting thing about this discovery is the absolute silence of history surrounding those ancient people. No monuments were left behind, no precious burial goods, and absolutely no names were recorded for posterity. There were only a few shallow cuts on a mammoth bone that had yellowed over time, surviving through tens of thousands of long years. The cut was made by a person who knelt in a cold cave at the edge of a frozen world and worked in silence. Whoever they were, according to old historical models, they were not allowed to appear there at that harsh time. Yet they were still there, surviving strongly, and they were not alone. In this prehistoric world, full of dangers, in the year 2003, an international research team entered a large limestone cave on a remote island in Southeast Asia. They began digging deep into the cool cave floor dirt, with the original purpose not being to find a completely new human species. They merely searched for evidence of how modern humans migrated through this island chain tens of thousands of years ago. However, what they pulled up from the ground was a skeleton so small that they initially mistook it for a child. But in reality, it was not so. That skeleton belonged to a fully grown adult female when bone analyses were completed. This individual, when alive, stood only about 1 meter tall and possessed an extremely unique tiny physique. Her brain, when measured from the intact skull volume, was only as big as a grapefruit, with a capacity of about 400 cubic centimeters. This brain size was only 1/3 compared to modern humans, and equivalent to the brain of a chimpanzee. She once lived and hunted on this tropical island from about 50,000 years ago in a wild world. The consequences of this discovery caused a massive explosion in the paleontology field. Even before the bone pieces were categorized, a completely separate human species with a different anatomical structure from modern humans and ancient Europeans was found. This tiny human species lived on an isolated tropical island during the same time modern humans painted on cave walls. They were not our direct ancestors, but contemporaries living parallelly on the same planet. The research team named this new species after the island where they were found, tied to the prehistoric dwarf nickname. The bones excavated from this cave in subsequent campaigns revealed more and more bizarre stories. The skeletons were not only small in size, but their body structures also had extremely anomalous characteristics. Their feet had a disproportionately large ratio compared to their body height, creating a walking gait unlike anyone else. The wrist part still retained many primitive features, reminiscent of ancient southern ape men rather than modern humans. Their jawbones completely lacked the protruding chin part that we usually see in human species appearing later. However, that tiny skull ruled over a body that knew how to hunt and butcher wild beasts to survive for tens of thousands of years. And right at this point, all standard models about the connection between brain volume and intelligence began to collapse. The dirt layers surrounding the skeleton contained many exquisite stone tools, rather than roughly chipped stone flakes. Those were sharp stone blades, pointed tips, and punching tools, crafted in an extremely skillful and technical manner. In the same stratigraphic layer, scientists found butchered bones of an ancient dwarf elephant species extinct on the island. These dwarfs organized group hunting for them, knowing how to coordinate, plan, and bring down beasts many times larger. They achieved that using weapons designed, calculated, and manufactured by their own hands from volcanic stone. At this cave, archaeologists also found clear traces of using fire to cook food. There was even evidence that they regularly returned to live in the same cave across very long periods of time. A creature with a brain only the size of a grapefruit did things that our species always prides itself on as proof of uniqueness. All views that supreme cognitive evolution is the exclusive privilege of modern humans have now been refuted. The skeleton was then brought to the National Museum in London, catalogued, photographed, and treated as an archaeological artifact. He was dubbed the first Briton, a historical icon, marking the dawn of humans on this island nation. For many decades, facial reconstruction models in the museum all gave him an appearance completely based on prejudices of that time. That was a man with white skin, light-colored hair, and characteristic features of modern Northern Europeans today. The reason was because at that time, no one ever doubted or questioned whether this assumption was true to reality. They took it for granted that he was the direct ancestor, the person who would give birth to generations, building villages, towns, and cathedrals. Racial continuity was considered obvious. But right at this point, old hypotheses completely collapsed. In the year 2018, a research group successfully extracted the genetic code from his extremely hard ear bone part. This is one of the few bone structures capable of preserving genetic materials intact across tens of thousands of historical years. This gene map decoding process was the most complete study ever performed on an ancient British individual. When genetic markers for skin and hair pigmentation were displayed, the results shattered all prejudices lasting the past century. This man possessed a dark brown to black skin color, dark tightly curled hair, and a strange bright blue eye pair. The combination of these appearance features completely mismatched any public imaginations about ancient Europeans. It was also completely opposite to the old reconstruction statues being solemnly displayed inside the museum glass cases themselves. A new bust statue was urgently ordered for reconstruction, entirely based on the actual genetic data just found. The newly revealed face was completely unfamiliar to generations of citizens who were used to the old reconstruction image before. The first Briton looked completely unlike the people living on this island today who always claim to be descendants. The consequences from this discovery spread everywhere, changing perceptions about the evolutionary history of European inhabitants. White skin in Europe, which had long been considered an ancient native feature, turned out to be a newly appeared biological adaptation. His skeleton still lies there in the glass case, controlled strictly for climate. In the capital city London through the years, those were small bones of a man who lived before agriculture, pottery, and cathedrals appeared. He was the first Briton, a face that this island nation had to look at a second time before daring to accept the truth. The next shocking discovery was not because of its giant size, but because of its extremely strange and anomalous biological structure. This creature was about 9 meters long from snout to tail, a relatively modest size compared to other long-necked dinosaurs. A few related species of it could reach heights exceeding 30 meters and body weights approaching the 70-ton mark. And the herbivorous animal that once wandered along these ancient river systems possessed a head challenging all rules. The numbers about its tooth structure were truly hard to believe. More than 500 teeth, packed tightly inside a flat jaw. They were not arranged to tear prey flesh, nor used to crush hard nuts or old tree branches. All these teeth lined up together, creating a continuous cutting surface, operating like a sharp mechanical blade close to the ground. And the most special thing was, the entire cutting tooth system of this creature had the ability to automatically renew in a continuous replacement. The research team determined that this dinosaur species replaced every single tooth in its mouth after every 14 days. A complete tooth replacement cycle occurred twice a month and maintained continuously like that throughout the creature's entire life. This animal basically walked through the Cretaceous period and continuously shed teeth, just like other animals peel skin today. But it was the detailed structure of the skull that made paleobiologists feel most bewildered and astonished. When conducting a skull structure scan, the research team discovered the bones surrounding the head area were so thin that light could pass through. Its cranial vault was like a transparent shell made of thin bone. Extremely anomalous special structure. This pale bone layer, like a ghost, was in a few places even thinner than a normal sheet of paper that we use. Yet it still supported a chewing jaw muscle system, operating under extreme mechanical pressure continuously for many long years. The skull of this creature was both one of the most specialized structures and the most fragile structure ever evolved in animals. The scientist leading the research team shared the feeling of astonishment when holding its skull up against the morning sunlight. He witnessed with his own eyes light passing through the bone cavities, creating a sight like stained glass windows in churches. The consequences of this discovery for the paleontology field were extremely huge, turning upside down many old views before. During the 20th century, dinosaurs were often imagined as enlarged variants of familiar animal species. The old thinking model only rotated around the story of size scale, rather than structural anomaly and difference. This duck-billed dinosaur shattered that old thinking frame when proving biological diversity beyond imagination. This was a creature that evolved into a professional grazing machine, specialized to the maximum to survive in the environment. Its skull was streamlined to the minimum amount of bone necessary, just enough to hold the giant tooth conveyor belt fixed. It was absolutely not the enlarged version of any animal species currently existing on our Earth today. This was a unique evolutionary direction and completely left no equivalent representative in modern times. No creature today chews food in this manner. No species sheds and replaces teeth with such a dizzying speed. And also no species carries a skull as thin as glass, running through the wild world, full of lurking dangers. And this was only a single animal species, found at a specific location at a short moment in history. If this creature was what the arid desert region randomly preserved from an ancient riverbed, then the question raised is very large. What other animal species once wandered along those ancient riverbanks without leaving a single bone fragment for posterity? What architectures of bone, teeth, and flesh once evolved, developed brilliantly, then vanished completely into endless time? This dinosaur was not a freak evolutionary anomaly, but a highly successful animal species in its environment. It adapted perfectly to its ecological niche, being part of a stable ecosystem existing across millions of long years. For the prehistoric world back then, its existence was completely normal, obvious, and nothing strange at all. And we found it entirely by chance, in one of the most barren and harsh lands on Earth today, just because desert winds eroded just enough of the sandstone layer to expose the edge of an ancient jawbone. The ancient animal species that we know of today are merely the species we were lucky enough to accidentally encounter. In September of 1944, teenagers and a small dog were walking on dense hills in the west. The dog suddenly disappeared after plunging down a deep hole left by an uprooted old tree after a big storm. When the oil lamps of the teenager group swept across the stone walls, a prehistoric art world abruptly appeared brilliantly. Those were herds of horses galloping, bulls as long as a whole bus, and herds of deer with long antlers on the cave ceiling. The drawing lines were extremely confident and vivid, to the point that it seemed they had just been drawn only a few minutes ago. Some drawings were small enough to be covered completely by a hand, but others had extremely giant and grand dimensions. The largest bull in the main room stretched more than 5 meters from nose to tail, expressed by a single continuous drawing line. That was a masterly drawing line, to the point that no modern artist could improve or draw better than the prehistoric human years ago. The color pigments were still extremely brilliant and fresh. To this day, after tens of thousands of years, hidden in thick darkness, that was dark red extracted from iron ore, black from charcoal, yellow ochre from clay rich in iron, and white from limestone. These colors were crushed small, mixed evenly with animal fat and water, creating a paint type with astonishing durability. They used self-made brushes made from moss and animal hair to apply color, or blue color through hollow bird bone segments to create effects. The soft color transition effect on the flanks of the horses, or the shadow cast under the bull belly, was performed extremely skillfully. This was definitely not the random graffiti of idle hunters during rainy and stormy days. The stone cavities carved deep into the cave walls still retain traces of wooden beam slots once used as scaffolding for artists. They brought stone lamps filled with animal fat, using wicks made of juniper trees to light up the dark cave space. They worked diligently for many hours in an atmosphere thick with lamp smoke and the breath of the group working together. They ground colors in large seashells, mixed binders, tested different color tones before placing the drawing line on the rock wall. They continuously returned to these rooms from generation to generation to keep completing the artworks. They were not merely drawing back images of animals, but they were searching for ways to recreate their movement in space. They discovered the foundational principle of animated film art 17,000 years before film stock was born. The consequences from this discovery were truly hard to absorb and accept. For our ordinary historical thinking, the humans who created this masterpiece completely lacked agriculture, did not know how to make pottery, had no writing, and no metal tools. They lived a wild life like their ancestors for tens of thousands of years before that, hunting reindeer and wild horses on the steppes. They knew how to calculate the change of flickering firelight, impacting curved rock walls to create vivid movement illusions. The distance between what we impose on Ice Age humans and what they actually achieved is a massive abyss. This art cave had to close completely, not receiving visitors since 1963 to protect it. The breath and body temperature of millions of tourists were destroying the color pigments faster than 17 millennia in darkness. An exact replica version now serves tourists, while the original rooms are locked. Vin. Inside those dark rooms, herds of horses still continue to gallop, and bulls still confront each other through the years. The torches of the past have gone out long ago, but the drawings that firelight once made alive still lie on the rock wall, waiting in silence. The first material evidence about the next ancient human species was surprisingly small, to the point of being hard to believe when found. That was only a very small pinky finger bone fragment, smaller than a coin, found on the floor of a Siberian cave. This cave, when looked at from the outside, was completely ordinary and nothing prominent. A dark crevice located hidden on a dense mountainside. Archaeologists persistently excavated this stone room for many years, collecting a lot of stone tools and ancient animal bones. The pinky finger bone fragment was found in a sediment layer with an age determined to be around 50,000 years ago. Initially, it was taken for granted to belong to the ancient European human species and was sent for genetic analysis as a routine verification procedure. However, the returned gene map result was completely not of ancient Europeans and also not of our modern humans. The consequence of this discovery immediately caused a major earthquake in the global scientific community at that time. A completely new human species, existing parallelly with modern humans and ancient Europeans, was discovered in recent history. They did not live in a distant past, millions of years ago, but once walked on Earth. Within the past 100,000 years, while our ancestors were busily drawing horses on cave walls, this human species was living along Siberian forests. They left behind their fingerprints in cave soil layers, traces that 50,000 years later we could read. They were named after the very cave where the first bone fragment was found, a name tied to the cold northern land. To this very day, all we have about this human species is only a few teeth and a jawbone fragment in the highland region. Almost no archaeological evidence is large enough to help us reconstruct a complete face of theirs. We do not know what they looked like, what their average height was, skull shape, or hand structure was. We only know them through chemical analyses of genetic sequences. Read backward from a bone fragment smaller than a fingernail. But it was these genetic data that revealed a haunting truth and changed the perspective on humanity. This ancient human species did not only live confined inside the northern cave or the cold Siberian region throughout tens of thousands of evolutionary years. Genetic evidence proved they were once distributed across a vast territory throughout Asia during hundreds of thousands of long years, and they did not disappear without leaving any traces for posterity. They left a part of their flesh and blood right inside us. Our species met their species, and the two sides did not merely coexist peacefully on the same territory. They interbred with each other, and the special genetic signature in the southern highland region is the clearest and deepest proof of that. Highland residents live at altitudes over 4,000 meters, where the atmosphere is so thin it can cause danger to ordinary people. They still live healthily, thanks to possessing a special gene variant that helps regulate how the body reacts to oxygen deficiency situations. That miraculous gene variant was not evolved by modern humans themselves, but was inherited from this very northern, ancient human species. A human species that vanished, leaving no castles, monuments, or writing, gave posterity a great biological key. Each highland citizen, herding cattle on windswept pastures, is actually breathing with the lungs of a prehistoric ghost. This ancient human species also interbred with the ancient European human species. At that very remote Siberian cave years ago, a bone fragment of a teenage girl who lived 90,000 years ago was determined to be a direct first-generation hybrid. The girl had an ancient European mother and a northern ancient human father, a vivid proof of the relationship between human species. There were once different human species walking together on a landscape, building families together and raising children together. And then, for some mysterious reason, within the past 50,000 years, all other human branches abruptly sank into silence. We do not know why that happened, and how that extinction process took place brutally in the past.